Like, am I lazy? Am I procrastinating? Or am I tired? In this video, we're going to talk about how to know if you need to push yourself or if you actually need to rest. So a couple of weeks ago, I made a video about how I had more demands than capacity. I was stretched beyond my limitations, and I was just to the point where I was exhausted. I had so many things that still need to be done, but I had no energy to do them. And I remember I was having a moment where I was beating myself up because I was feeling very lazy. I found myself scrolling on social media more than often. I found myself avoiding doing certain things that I needed to do. And I was trying to figure out, like, God, what is going on? Like, am I lazy? Am I procrastinating? Or am I tired? And I think a lot of us get to that point where it gets really difficult to tell if we actually need to rest because we're tired or if we need to push ourselves and go a little further. And I think sometimes the lines can get blurred, especially when you're in busy seasons where it's like God has blessed you with all the responsibilities and the things that you have on your plate. But then there are some times where you're just like, okay, I feel like this is just too much for me. So how do we define rest, and how do we know if we actually need to rest or if we need to push ourselves a little further? Now, before we can even decide which one we need to do, we need to talk about what rest actually means. So one of my favorite scriptures that helps me to understand rest is in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. And I'm going to read it in the Amplified version. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden and overburdened, and I will give you rest. I will ease and relieve and refresh your souls. So this passage of scripture highlights the fact that we sometimes get to the point where we are overburdened, we are tired, and we are in need of rest. And we can find that rest in the Lord. I have a video that talks about how to discern your season, and in that video I talked about seasons of rest and what they actually mean. But just to summarize a little bit here, that word rest means to cease from all labor in order to collect one's strength. And so there are different types of rest that the Lord gives depending on what you are in need of. And those two different types are active rest and passive rest. Now, when you think of passive rest, this is rest where you are ceasing from all labor. So when you think of passive rest, think of ceasing from all labor. This is where you're taking that day off, you're taking that mental health day, and you are just ceasing from all the things that you are doing. This can also be a Sabbath where you are practicing not doing any of the chores and the work and all the things, but solely just dedicating a day to resting and recovering in the presence of the Lord. Whatever it is, passive rest means to stop everything that you're doing to recollect your strength. Now, active rest, on the other hand, is what I like to consider working under the grace of the Lord. And so this is in seasons where you may have, again, a lot of demands and a lot of things on your schedule, and they are all things that need to be done at that time, right? And so in that case, when you are at the end of your own strength, you are able to tap into the active rest of the Lord and work under His grace. Meaning there are some people that you see who have a bunch of stuff on their plate and they're still able to get it all done. And that is because they are working under the grace of the Lord. They are graced to handle the capacity that God has given them during that time. And if someone else were to try to step in and do what they were doing, they would not be able to function because they do not have the grace to do that. And so this is a time, again, where your demands sometimes exceed your capacity, but they are things that the Lord has instructed you to do for that season, right? They are stretching seasons. And in those seasons, the Lord is giving you active rest where He will refresh you as you are executing. He will supply you with the supernatural energy as you are moving. And I'll give you an example. So in 2022, I was working a full-time job, a part-time job. I was also running my business. I had a YouTube channel and a nonprofit. In that same year, the Lord told me to write my book, launch a conference, and I was also working on projects with clients for my business. So when I even say that out loud, it seems like unrealistic to be able to do all those things at one time. However, the Lord had already instructed me that those were the things that needed to get done during that year, and He had given me a grace to do it, right? So I was working in the will of God and working in alignment. And so the moments where I felt extremely depleted and tired, the Lord was giving me a grace to push those things out because they were time sensitive. Now, again, in those moments, there were moments where I was fatigued, moments where I felt like I did not have it. And so there were times where I actually had to fast and execute under the grace of the Lord while fasting to make up for those demands. But in another season, recently, I was working, and this is around the time that I made that video, where I was just like, I feel like I have more demands than capacity, and I feel like I'm overwhelmed and I'm tired to the point where I'm forgetting things. I'm very exhausted. That was a moment where I was working outside of the grace of the Lord, and He had to usher me into passive rest. So I actually took the entire weekend off to recover and collect my strength and redetermine my priorities. So in that season, the Lord revealed to me that I was working on too many things at once, and all those things were not a priority for that moment, right? So sometimes we can get very ambitious in the things that we want to do, but we still have to make sure that even in our ambition that we are surrendering all of the things that we're doing to the Lord and making sure that they are a priority in that season. Right? Sometimes you can get a lot of ideas from God and a lot of things that you want to do, but all those things don't need to be executed in the same season. And in the beginning of the year, you can get very ambitious and set all these goals for yourself and get distracted just from a pure place, right? A place of excitement, a place of, wanting to crush and kill your goals, but you can lose sight of what is a priority in this season. And so you can burn your body out. And for me, I was just getting to the point where I could not even show up. My sleep was very inconsistent and it just was not healthy. So the Lord ushered me into a place of passive rest. So I hope that gives you a better understanding of the different types of rest between active and passive. So now let's talk about how to identify when you need to rest or when you need to push yourself. First, I'm going to give you a couple of signs that you need to rest. My number one sign that you need to rest is if your body is telling you need to rest. Okay, if your body and mind are telling you that you need to rest, you need to listen to your body, because your body will sometimes respond before your mind catches up. And so what that looks like is if you are finding yourself forgetting things very often and easily, you probably need to rest and slow down. Number two, if your sleep is starting to get inconsistent, where you are, waking up at all different times of the night, you're having trouble sleeping, or you're having trouble falling asleep, or you feel like you're getting less than the recommended, number of sleep over a long period of time, you need to rest. There was a time literally like 3 weeks ago, this is the time period that I was talking about, where I was going for like a week period, and I was only getting about 4 to 5 hours of sleep versus my typical 7 to 8. And literally I started forgetting things. Forgetting things that I should have remembered. I was always falling asleep in the middle of the day. I was relying heavily on caffeine at that time. And so my body was like, listen, you need to rest. And the Lord was reminding me like, okay, I know that you have a lot on your plate right now, but we need to reset. Let me refresh you so that you are prepared to continue to go. Do not feel guilty for when you need to rest, right? Even the Lord rested on the seventh day, so you need rest as well, okay? Rest is an invitation from God to be refreshed. Okay, it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong when He sits you down. It doesn't mean that, you're not doing enough. It just means that your body and your mind need to be refreshed. It is normal and it is okay. Okay, rest is important. Rest is just as important as executing. You are not lazy for resting. I just want to say that again. You are not lazy for resting. If your body is telling you that you need to rest, you need to rest. Okay. And how long you do that is up to you. When you're starting to feel better, work with the Lord to figure that out. For me, taking the weekend off was just the amount of time that I needed. But sometimes there are seasons where the Lord will call me into a season of rest. But you want to just make sure that you're being sensitive to your body and also what the Lord is saying during that time. Now that we've talked about some of the signs that show you need to rest, let's talk about some of the signs that show you need to push yourself. Now, as we go into these signs, I want to bring back something that I said in the How to Discern Your Season video, where I talked about how some of you are actually claiming a season of rest, but you're really in a season of procrastination. You have been stalling on the things that you need to do and then claiming it as rest, but it's not rest, it's disobedience and it's procrastination, and you need to get back into alignment. So one of the first signs that you need to push yourself is if you've been procrastinating on something that God told you to do for a very long time. right? God will give you the active grace to execute what you need to do, even if you're executing out of season. Let me give you an example. The Lord called me to write one of my books about 4 years ago. I procrastinated and I was disobedient. And the time that He told me to write it, I was actually in a season of rest. So I would have had more time to do it. However, because I procrastinated, I then had to execute it in a season that was one of the busiest seasons of my life because the time for it had already come. Right? So sometimes when the Lord gives you something, He's giving it to you ahead of time. It's because He knows what types of seasons you'll be in the future. And when you're executing out of season, that could be one of the reasons why you're so tired and feeling like you're burnt out. It's because you're executing out of season. However, the Lord will give you the grace to push it out. And so if you have been procrastinating on something that the Lord called you to do and you're wondering whether you should push it out or whether you should just rest, you don't need to rest anymore, honey. You need to push it out. Okay. And you need to ask for the grace to make the time to do it, right? In that season, it was literally the same season in 2022 that I was telling you guys about, where I was working, a full-time job, a part-time job. I had my business, my nonprofit, all that stuff. This was the year that I had to stop procrastinating on that book. And so literally the Lord gave me a strategy where I would wake up an hour early for like a month and a half to start writing that book. But I was tired, but He gave me the grace to work through it. Right? So again, if you have been procrastinating on something that the Lord called you to do and you're wondering if you need to push yourself, yes, you need to push yourself and you need to get it done, and God will give you the grace to do it. The second sign that you need to push yourself is if you know you have the time, but you're just not choosing to do what you need to do. Okay? I no longer want to hear the excuse that you don't have enough time. We make time for what is important to us. And specifically when it comes to God projects, we don't prioritize them because we feel like they don't have weight or we feel like they can wait another day. But it is prideful to think that the things that the Lord has called you to do don't hold as much weight as the things that say your boss told you to do. And so even outside of God projects, you know that you have that project to do, you know that you have that assignment to do, and you know that you have the time to do it, but you're choosing to scroll on social media, right? Or you're choosing to, do anything that you can to distract yourself. You need to push yourself and you need to walk in discipline, right? Stop waiting around for motivation to do something and start honoring your word and committing to it, right? Discipline happens when motivation runs out. Discipline is making the decision when you can choose between procrastinating or executing. Choose to execute. And the more that you practice doing this, the higher your discipline will be. Now, the third sign that you need to push yourself is when you have a tight deadline, okay? Tight deadlines are signs that you need to push yourself because you need to get it done. And I don't care what nobody says. When I have a tight deadline and I feel like I just don't have it, but it has to get done, I'm going to get me some caffeine, okay? I'm going to get me an iced coffee. I'm going to get me a Red Bull because it's not something that I do often. And sometimes you just need that push, okay? Sometimes you need prayer and some coffee. Okay, just to get through that. And then you need to make sure that you're scheduling in time to rest for whatever you feel like you lack during that time. But get your stuff done, y'all. No longer are we going to be procrastinating on stuff that needs to get done and then stressing ourselves out, burning ourselves out for no reason. We're going to start taking our time seriously and stewarding it well. Okay, so if you're experiencing any of those signs, it's a sign that you need to push yourself, but also pray about it so that you're working under the grace of the Lord. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I know sometimes you may feel like you don't have time to rest. You're in a busy season, but you can always delegate, take time to analyze your priorities, and that will give you a better scope of where you can put in the rest. And also pray. The Lord is here to help you in those times where your demands exceed your capacity. And He will give you the wisdom to know whether you need to rest or you need to push yourself a little further. Okay? Be sensitive to what the Lord is saying. Be sensitive to what your body is saying. I hope this has been helpful. I love you guys so much, and I'll talk to you on the next video.